Welcome to today's episode of RPA Radio. Today, we'll dive into the initiatives shaping a healthier and more equitable communities across the United States. I'm your host, Dr. Sam Bowden Akbari, and today we're exploring the Healthy Regions Planning Exchange, a collaborative network focused on integrating health equity into regional planning. To dive in, Vanessa and I will discuss how RPA got this national planning network off the ground and why this work is so needed in the planning world. Vanessa?
Yeah, let's do it. Thank you again for having me. I'm Vanessa Barrios, Director of DEI Initiatives here at RPA. As we mentioned in the last episode, the fourth plan was the impetus for this network. Once the fourth regional plan was published, it was clear that we wanted not only to share this work and these recommendations, but how we did this work. We initially moved a learning collaborative project proposal forward with how regional planning entities, so nonprofits, councils of governments, and public health departments deeply influence community health as a whole. And we reached out to hundreds of contacts and planning networks with a request for applications to this learning collaborative. Through our application review and participant interviews, it became really clear that no single organization could adequately represent an entire region. So each region needed the involvement of a community organization to co-learn and to grow together. To do this, applicants were encouraged to involve orgs that they were already working with or orgs that they wished to build deeper connections with. So we have initially we had 11 different regions working with us. So from the Bay Area in California, we had Spur Urban Habitat working partnerships in the United States, and Buffalo, the Greater Buffalo Niagara Regional Transportation Corp, Lisk Buffalo, Push Buffalo, and in Chicago, we initially had the Chicago Department of Public Health, Metropolitan Planning Council, the Illinois Public Health Institute, and the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning. In Los Angeles, we had folks from the Alliance for Community Transit Los Angeles, the Thai CDC, and the Los Angeles County Department of Public Health. In New Orleans, we had the Louisiana Fair Housing Action Center, which was formerly called the Greater New Orleans Housing Action Center, and Operation Restoration. From New York, we were working with us, the Regional Plan Association, and Community Voices Heard, and we later brought in Make the Road New York. In Pittsburgh, we had folks from the Hill District Consensus Group, Pittsburghers for Public Transit, and Just Harvest. And in Portland, Oregon, we had folks from the Multnomah County Department of Public Health who brought on board Beyond Black Community Development Corporation and the City of Gresham Redevelopment Commission. In Twin Cities, we had folks from the Alliance for Metropolitan Stability, Frogtown Neighborhood Association, and the New American Development Center. And we also included an Indigenous women-led organization from the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota with an organization called the Thunder Valley Community Development Corporation. By the beginning of 2019, we established the Healthy Regions Planning Exchange, and this was a peer-to-peer learning network. We brought together advocates, planners, health officials, community-based representatives from all of the organizations and regions that I just mentioned. And our focus was on health equity in metropolitan planning with a strong emphasis on racial justice for Black, Indigenous, and communities of color. We aimed to address the legacy of racism in urban planning, particularly in land use, housing, and transportation decisions.
So, in the fourth regional plan, it calls for a greater focus on equity. You think about how can we really embed equity in the planning process and say, in order to answer this question, let's set up a peer-to-peer learning exchange with community organizations, government agencies, health centers, and really kind of match folks up in different regions so that they can learn from each other. And all
Mm-hmm.
this kicked off in 2019.
You sure did.
2019 was feels like a whole different time from today.
It was a different lifetime ago. it was in April 2019 that we managed to bring 35 people from across the country to the RPA offices in New York City for our opening symposium. During this event, we identified key themes with racism emerging as the key issue. We set collective goals and defined the purpose, outcomes, and processes for our partnership, which laid a pretty strong foundation for our collaborative efforts. One of the major issues that came up from this kickoff event was related to how society and practice addresses Indigenous people. We had a facilitator who we worked with in coordinating the opening symposium, and when she did the first presentation, she shared a chart which was meant to show the disparities in health equity for different race and ethnic groups across the board. And unfortunately, that facilitator failed to include information reflecting Indigenous people in America. And this was pointed out pointedly by our Indigenous partners from Thunder Valley. They called this out as a form of erasure called data genocide. If a group is invisible in the data, then their priorities and issues are invisible and therefore will continually be unaddressed.
So in this first convening at the opening symposium, the peer-to-peer exchange happened immediately by calling this out and bringing just this a really basic thing like data inclusivity to the fore. So like at the jump, the planning exchange was doing what it meant to do.
It sure did. And I think the other piece that I continually go back on as somebody who coordinates this group and has coordinated this group over the past 5 years is that, you know, we're again we're operating out of the knowledge of 2019, and of course back then, even before um the unrest that happened in 2020. I think a lot of folks tended to dance around the idea of racism and how that impacts us. Um, and this was the first time RPA was part of a conversation, part of a collaborative, of a network that on the jump, right off the jump, probably second day of the convening, that we had a conversation on how we cannot, as planners, move forward or even think about implementing recommendations unless we are beholden and very upfront of to the fact that racism has had a huge influence on the practice. Um, and I was really proud of RPA and the everyone who was involved, where we actually took that really seriously. I mean, it was something that was a prevalent in our research from the fourth regional plan, but we didn't have a moment where we were, confronted with it and it created a little tension. And of course, any conversation like that is inevitably uncomfortable. But oftentimes, I'm a huge proponent for leaning into discomfort. When you feel discomfortable in a situation, it means that you're moving away from the status quo of comfort.
Yeah,
And
you really have your finger on something.
yeah, we had a moment where we're like, oh, wow, like we're doing something that's, changing the status quo. And we kind of have to do that if we want to see the changes that we want to see in the fourth plan.
Yep. So what did you guys do after the opening symposium?
So yeah, after this phase, again, we did a couple of uh, webinars where we focused on critical areas like housing, transportation, and climate justice policy. I think the funny thing that I want to note on here is that all of these webinars were all on Zoom. And as you might remember, 2019, not everybody was familiar with Zoom. But
Yes,
through
this
that
was
practice,
famously pre-COVID and everyone being introduced to Zoom.
yeah, so it was funny that we were already in that vibe of being on these online webinars and conversations. Because, of course, when you have a network of people from four different time zones, 10 different cities, many states, like you inevitably have to utilize these mechanisms to help have these conversations um, from many distances. So again, we had these conversations where we explored the intricate link between race, planning, community health, and I think this helped establish robust foundations for targeted conversations and actions that we were inevitably going to see in 2020.
Okay, so you
Uh,
had your kickoff meeting in person. You follow up with webinars, trend setting ahead of the Zoom curve.
mhm.
When was the second symposium?
Well, we initially thought this was going to be the closing symposium, but we
Ah,
now call her the second symposium. This took place in March 2020 in New Orleans.
what a time.
What a time. And interestingly enough, we had worked with the Louisiana Housing Action Center, and when we asked them like what's the date that we should aim for, and that year in 2020 we had Mardi Gras, which was the last week of February.
Mhm.
And typically they have a break in between then until 2 weeks later, which is when their legislative session starts. So they're like, you can only have it this week. And we're like, all right, I guess we're having it March 3rd, 2020. And at this event, each region, we helped work together to identify actionable goals to collaborate on towards throughout 2020. And obviously, COVID-19 had different plans. Strangely, due to the fact that our New Orleans convening was held literally the week that the world shut down, our follow-up conversations, all held on Zoom, naturally led to a knowledge sharing opportunity on the pandemic's health impacts on our communities.
It
You
was kind of
know,
serendipitous.
it was incredibly serendipitous that we had a level of comfort and connection already established online. Um, we continued these engagements through monthly Zoom meetings and sharing these best practices on how our municipalities were addressing the challenges posed by the pandemic. We were able to hear about what was happening. Us in New York, we were at the forefront of everything that was happening. So we were sharing about what we were experiencing, what other regions needed to look forward to or prepare for, not look forward to prepare for. Um, and yeah, so at the end of the day, we thought that that event was going to be our closing symposium within our grant scope. But in reality, that event marked a pivotal moment for everyone. And thanks to additional funding from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and Bloomberg Philanthropies, we were able to continue our work into a second phase, which allowed us to build on the progress made during this initial period.
Yeah, and I think the fact that the pandemic put, public health and health equity, especially with the disparities of who was most impacted by COVID, really front and center in the work, I'm sure ramped up the importance of the planning exchange. And it sounds like that's what allowed you to have a phase two here, right? Have the second symposium not be the final symposium.
It sure did. And phase two, which ran from 2020 to 2022, we built on the discussions that we had in New Orleans, and launched regional work plans focusing on implementing specific legislative, policy, and budgetary changes. RPA supported these efforts through network discussions, through monthly calls, research paper releases, and joint problem solving sessions. This phase brought new perspective on policy ideas, on advocacy and research. For example, in Chicago, metropolitan planning councils uh, advocated for a citywide comprehensive plan which integrated health in all policies. Um, and then also RPA's work helped inform and co-inform San Francisco's work in a parking tax study. A major theme that carried through from phase one and beyond was how systemic racism is embedded in the urban planning history and practice. Some of our work plans focused on addressing this. One notable example is the Alliance for Community Transit in Los Angeles, ACT-LA's framework for non-policing options on their metropolitan transportation system, which you could read more in the report. Metro as a Sanctuary. We'll drop the link when we publish. One of
Nice.
the things I, yes,
Oh, no.
definitely.
No, I think the link is valuable for the listeners because having that example of what kind of options you can use on metros aside from policing is hugely important. That's definitely something that New York is grappling with now.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the other major things that I want to flag from the Healthy Regions Planning Exchange is that we ensured in phase two that pass-through funding for for our participants will be a major piece in this project. Um, in phase one, we were able to give honorariums to participants for their time, for their energy, for them coming to New York, for participating on the webinar calls. But it became really clear in not only in 2020, but in even back when we were doing the regional plan and community engagement work. We can't just pick people's brains or like expect people to prioritize their time to do a particular thing if we don't have, money to support that. Funding is incredibly important, especially when we're thinking about this. So we were able through we were able to share support and empower them to continue this vital work.
Nice. So pass through funding is that kind of like when one organization gets a big grant, they help can share it and help support the work of the other members kind of like in coalition.
Precisely,
Nice.
precisely. Yes, and finally, we've released a research report focusing on the different paths our participants have taken to incorporate and address health equity in their work. So that report's called Pathways to Health Equity. You can find this report on the RPA website. And additionally, we published a report on linking health equity to infrastructure development titled Investing in Infrastructure for Healthy Communities.
Nice. So quite a bit of literature has come out of the Healthy Region Planning Exchange, and we can link to the reports that we're calling out in the show notes.
Yeah.
So quite a bit came out of phase two. What did phase three look like?
Well, we were on a roll. RPA gained additional funding for this work in phase three. We kept our focus on advancing racial justice for Black, Indigenous, and communities of color, but through the avenues of land use, housing, and transportation decisions. Our regions worked to educate and promote policies that ensured safe and stable housing. They identified priority projects for federal spending that aligned with our equity goals and worked on building a foundation for improved public transportation access across the nation. Additionally, we supported initiatives designed to foster healthier and more equitable communities and organized resistance against projects that could potentially diminish health equity or counteract environmental justice.
Would an example of that, Vanessa, be something like a highway expansion?
Precisely. For example, in Multnomah County, they have been focused on sharing knowledge on the impacts of what the bridge reconstruction work would be on I-5 for particular people, especially on top of that, of how pricing those bridge crossings would be for the people who would rely on it. And I think one of the major things that come out from this is so many people in Portland have been pushed out because of rising rents. So a lot of the people who formerly lived in Portland have had to move out of Portland, yet now have to pay to come back into Portland to do the jobs that they have been meant to do. And that has been something that they wanted to show what the health impacts are. So that's something that this particular project and this phase brought up.
So I think part of this picture too that it's, sparking in my mind as you're speaking, not only we think about expanding highways, but their original installations was a huge, racial justice issue, just decimating a lot of Black neighborhoods and bisecting them with highways. How does that link in with this work?
Well, in the research that we put a strong emphasis by sharing publications that tracked federal spending and raising awareness on the historical racist urban planning policies of the past and currently. Our goal was to amplify the potential benefits of specific infrastructure investments and how that can contribute to equity and justice. One of the things that we also tried to do and worked on to foster collaboration and address changes was we held monthly online meetings in early 2023. And these were specifically mentorship programs that we affectionately called planning partners, where we matched participants into peer groups based on their interests, their expertise, and curiosity. These groups focused on areas such as health and healing, local advocacy, national infrastructure challenges, and community engagement. We did get through the pilot program at the beginning of that. We had about 25 participants, but due to low time and capacity, scheduling conflicts, and inevitable Zoom fatigue, we actually ended up folding the mentorship program into our existing monthly all region calls. But yeah, it's really tough to get people. Although, as I mentioned earlier, in phase one, we got people very accustomed to being on Zoom. By phase three in 2023, we were all over being on screen.
Zoom fatigue is so real.
Yeah.
What are some of
And
the highlights of the different regions? Because you mentioned breaking out into all region calls. What are some of the highlights from those regional constellations?
yeah, I think that's the wonderful thing about these monthly calls. Like, we were able to have conversations and have a space for folks to both share success stories that were related to our work, related to planning and health, but also to share challenges. It's not all rosy, wonderful wins. But some of the highlights that we discussed were in Buffalo, New York, LISC Buffalo and the Greater Buffalo Niagara Regional Transportation Council focused on equitable and sustainable development with workshops and community engagement, which was inspired by the Equitable Development Scorecard effort in the Twin Cities from the Alliance for Metropolitan Stability. In Chicago, the Metropolitan Planning Council produced the Reconnecting Communities report, which documented the equity and environmental harm that was caused by transportation infrastructure in the past. And it also compiled a list of the top 22 project areas to reconnect communities in the Chicagoland area. In the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota, the Thunder Valley Community Development Corporation coordinated the Lakota Media Summit in 2023, which focused on Indigenous representation, health, healing, and storytelling. And in the San Francisco Bay Area, spur and urban habitat shifted a little bit from the original work plan in phase two to promote public transportation investment. Um, you know, I think this is something that a lot of metropolitan areas and transportation organizations had to face as we were coming out of the pandemic, that many of these organizations and transportation operators were not able to fund operations for their public transportation systems.
Yeah, no riders,
So,
no fares.
yes. So in California, Spur and Urban Habitat, they used coalition building and educational materials to help avert a fiscal crisis for their public transportation systems by influencing California state government to reallocating funding to ensure that their systems in the state would continue to operate. And they were successful,
Nice.
which is wonderful.
Thank God. We need our transit systems operational. So it sounds like the pandemic, focused things on health equity quite a bit, but it also caused Zoom fatigue after, what, by then, 3 years of organizing in this capacity. Has the Regional Planning Exchange been able to step away from Zoom and have some face-to-face interactions?
Yes, actually, we managed to reconvene in person in June 2023. With COVID restrictions lifted, the network was able to go beyond online video meetings and meet in person for the first time. And this 2-day event was attended by 22 participants representing 10 metropolitan areas from the exchange. We had 20 additional participants from the Multnomah County area that were represented by government officials, community organizers, and indigenous partners. The organizations from Multnomah County included the Multnomah Department of Public Health, the City of Gresham, the Emmanuel Displaced Persons Association 2, the Streets Trust, Albina Vision Trust, Future Generations Collaborative, and the Seven Waters Canoe family.
It's really impressive how many partners the Healthy Regions Planning Exchange has brought together.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I did not mention from phase one is that too often planners don't have a space to talk about the challenges related to health equity, related to race and racism in our work. So when you create a space dedicated to that and dedicated to finding solutions, it's something that people are attracted to because they want to be able to wrap their heads around it and have other people help wrap your head around specific issues.
Yeah, it's so necessary and you can't leave it to just, the inclinations of individual planners in a community engagement process. You can't let it slip through the cracks or go to the back burner. So it's
Yeah.
almost like a field of dreams. You've built it and organizations
It
have
will
come.
come. It
Yeah.
will come. Yeah, and the conversations in Portland and when we were together in 2023, we focused on infrastructure investment, its effects on communities in the past, and the tools that we can use to ensure that planning facilitates healthy communities today and in the future. We were able to learn from community members from the Emmanuel Displaced Persons Association 2 and the Albino Vision Trust to really see how community members were directly affected by displacement, which was caused by highway expansion and eminent domain in Portland.
So Portland officials used eminent domain to expand a highway, which created displaced people, and then these community organizations reacted to that.
Well, this is actually something that happened decades ago. As you could see, the Manual Displaced Persons Association 2, there was actually an original um, association from when it originally happened decades ago.
Yeah.
What's particularly heartbreaking, Sam, was we were able to visit the space in Albina, which is a neighborhood in Portland that used to be a bustling neighborhood of Black and African American people. Um, Eminent domain was used to destroy the community because with the intention of expanding the hospital that currently is still there.
Mhm.
When we went to visit the space where the original neighborhood was, the space is still an empty field
Hmm.
decades after.
So you're actually
And
able to do a site visit there.
yeah, and it was, we were reminded that oftentimes planners at community development organizations, they have all the intentions to improve a community at the expense of communities
Yeah.
and oftentimes don't deliver on that promise. And, as I said, all you have is an empty field.
Yep. Unintended consequences of not centering equity in the process.
Yeah. So, after the site visits and conversations, we worked on incorporating these lessons through within our home regions, and the cohort left with some concrete next steps internally and within the network to build from for the rest of phase three. Additionally, we had a group of participants attend a conference that was led by the Thunder Valley Community Development Corporation on Indigenous media and storytelling. So Members of our exchange, we attended the Lakota Media Summit in South Dakota. And that summit aimed to share how to better center Indigenous voices in our collective work.
And when was that visit?
That was in October 2023.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, no small feat to coordinate that.
No, not at all, and one of the challenges is that oftentimes we think about solving problems, or us as planners, we oftentimes think about how do we solve the ills of community? How do we solve what's wrong? One of the things that I've learned through Thunder Valley and working with Indigenous folks is that sometimes we need to shift that focus and shift towards where in our communities is there existing joy, where in this community is there existing life, and how do we plan from there? We tend to think about solving problems when perhaps we should be thinking about what's going right in a neighborhood. What can we help facilitate? What can we help support? So it's been a little bit of a knowledge shift here at in my brain and in the planning exchange.
Nice, nice. And I bet meeting in person was, revitalizing, more helpful, less Zoom fatigue.
Oh my God. It's hard. I mean, I'll just be real. Like with being on Zoom, it's just hard to put on a face, even though you're put on a face on a screen. But sometimes there's a reason why humans interact. It's why we have joy. It's because being able to be face to face it's transformative. We can read people's energy, their body language, and really go from there.
Yeah, and it's really productive too. I mean, I've seen, as the comms director, how much research has come out of this, the Healthy Regions Planning Exchange. Can you tell us some of that research and what's been put out?
Oh yeah, over the past 5 years, RPA has led many research and education efforts focusing on sharing publications that track federal spending and amplifying potential benefits of certain investments. So some key publications and blog posts include addressing racial equity in planning, pathways to health equity, preventing another IDA, stormwater management, and basement apartments in Central Queens, which focused on the impacts of flooding caused by extreme weather events, um, federal dollars for local infrastructure, which tracked IIJA funding in our region, demystifying federal funding for healthy communities. One blog post that I particularly love is our fostering cross-cultural collaboration and change, which um, reflected on what we learned at the Lakota Media Summit. And most recently, we came out with Housing as a Framework for Health Equity and Reclaiming Public Space for Health Equity. So all of these efforts aim to advance best practices that foster public health through equal access to healthy opportunities in the communities.
And if that was quite a blistering list for listeners, we will link to this research in our show notes. But Vanessa, you want to close us out with kind of, a forward-looking view, like what is ongoing work and goals for the planning exchange?
Sure. I mean, we are in phase 4. We have amazing work ahead of us. We will continue to focus on land use, healthy housing, and continuing on with thread of equitable infrastructure for health. The ultimate goal of this phase is to advance these best practices that foster public health through healthy opportunities in our communities. And the exchange has supported each region in implementing those work plans. They've been either updated or tweaked a little bit, but all of them continue on to advance health equity through facilitating meetings in their organizations and their communities through events, webinars, and RPA. We're going to continue with producing publications on best practices and strategies.
Nice. And if any of our listeners have any questions about Vanessa's work, the Healthy Region Planning Exchange, or you just want to write the show, you can hit us up at info@rpa.org. and we'll make sure the right person gets your question, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. Vanessa, thank you so much for explaining the Healthy Region Planning Exchange, really as a model for the nation on how to share best practices and center equity in planning. I can't thank you enough, but I think that's it for us in New York.
All right.
Goodbye for
Thank-
now.
Bye.
RPA Radio is produced by Sam Bowden Akbari for Regional Plan Association. Editing is by Megan McElroy. Our theme music is by Nate Dorr. Questions or comments? Email us at info@rpa.org or visit rpa.org for more.